I cut my grandmother off the day she called Child Protective Services on me for my own good, and now that she's dying, everyone in my family says I'm a monster for refusing to visit her, but none of them were there the night she looked me in the eye and said, "If you won't raise that baby the way I say, I'll find someone who will." I still hear those words when I try to fall asleep, like a curse that smells like menthol cigarettes and cheap perfume. To understand why I blocked my 82-year-old grandmother's number, why I told the hospice nurse she is not allowed near my daughter unless I am physically present, why I am the only one in the family not sitting vigil at her bedside right now. You have to understand that in our family, Grandma didn't just bake cookies and tell stories. She ruled. And she ruled with fear. My grandmother's name is Margaret, but everyone calls her Mags. She was a small woman with a big presence, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately make everyone straighten their posture and adjust their behavior, even as adults. She grew up poor, one of 8 kids in a tiny house, lost her own mother young, and raised her siblings while her father drank. That's how the legend goes, at least. We've all heard the story 1,000 times. I had to grow up fast, she'd say, lighting a cigarette with hands that never quite stopped moving. Nobody did anything for me. I learned you either take charge or you get crushed. My mother, Lisa, was her only child, which meant my grandmother got a second chance to raise someone the way she thought people should be raised. That phrase, "the way people should be raised," was her favorite. It covered everything. What you wore, how you ate, who you dated, which college you picked, whether you chose college at all. If your choice didn't match her script, you were throwing your life away. My earliest clear memory of my grandmother is not baking or cuddling or reading stories. It's her grabbing my wrist so hard her fingernails dug into my skin because I reached for a second cookie without asking. "Greedy girls end up alone," she said, yanking the plate away. I was 4. I remember looking at my mother, who opened her mouth like she might say something, then closed it again and gave me that strained half-smile that meant, just go along with it. Mom did a lot of going along with it. When I brought home a B in 2nd grade, Grandma told me B stood for barely trying. When I cut my hair into a bob at 13, she said I looked like a boy who got lost on the way to the barbershop and made me cry in the bathroom for an hour. When I told her I liked art, she said, "Artists starve. Nurses don't." You want to starve, and every conversation about my future after that started with her asking, "How are your science grades?" The thing about growing up with someone like Mags is that you normalize a certain level of cruelty. She called it honesty. She'd say, "Better you hear it from me than from the world," and Mom would nod like that made sense. When I got older, I realized my mother had been conditioned into that nod. My grandmother had been tearing her down since she was a kid, too. I remember once, when I was 8 or 9, I found an old photo of my mom in high school. She was in a cheerleading uniform, smiling, hair big and wild. I ran into the kitchen with the picture. "Mom, you are so pretty," I said. Before she could even answer, Grandma snatched the photo out of my hand. She thought looks would carry her, Grandma said. Got pregnant instead. My mom's face went white. I hadn't known I was an unplanned pregnancy until that moment. I didn't even really know what that meant. I just knew the way my mother's hand tightened around the dish towel, the way she turned away, and the way my grandmother's mouth curled in satisfaction, like she'd scored a point. As I got older, the cruelty morphed but never went away. When I was 15 and came home from school crying because a group of girls had made fun of my thrift store jeans, my grandmother said, "If you don't want to be laughed at, don't dress like trash," and handed me a catalog from some department store I could never afford. When I got my first boyfriend at 17, she interrogated me like he was an enemy soldier. "What does his father do? Does his family own their home? Is he planning on college? Don't you dare get pregnant before you have a ring. You'll end up like your mother." Mom flinched every time she said that. But she never told Grandma to stop. My mother's way of coping with Margaret was to shrink, to appease, to smooth over. "It's just how she is," Mom would say. "She doesn't mean any harm. She's from a different time." If I got angry, Mom would plead with me in the hallway after Grandma left. Please don't start with her. She'll make my life miserable. As if her life wasn't already miserable because of her. To be clear, my grandmother did help in some ways. She slipped my mom money when the rent was due and the car needed repairs. She watched me when my mom worked double shifts as a waitress. She bought school supplies when we couldn't afford them. But nothing she did was ever freely given. It was a ledger. A tab. Every favor became a debt we owed. And she collected. Oh, she collected. When my mom started seeing a nice guy named Jeff, my grandmother made it very clear she disapproved. He was too soft, not ambitious enough, divorced, came with baggage. His baggage being 2 kids he saw every other weekend. You don't want to be some man's second chance, Grandma told my mom. You deserve better. Which really meant, you deserve someone I approve of. When Mom moved in with Jeff anyway, my grandmother didn't talk to her for 2 months. Not a word. No calls. No visits. Just silence. For my mom, that silence was torture. It was like exile. We'd grown up in a world where Grandma's approval was currency and her withdrawal of attention was the harshest punishment. Sometimes I think my mom would have preferred being hit to being frozen out. 2 months later, Grandma showed up at our apartment unannounced, arms full of groceries, acting like nothing had happened. Mom cried, hugged her, apologized. For what, I don't even know. I'll try harder, Mom said, like a kid. I just want you in my life. Grandma pat her cheek and said, see that you do. That was the pattern. Control, withdrawal, return, conditions. Repeat. When I left for college, I thought I was leaving all of that behind. I got a partial scholarship to a state school 2 hours away. I majored in graphic design, not nursing. Grandma called it a hobby degree. She also sent me a check for $500 my first semester with a note that said, don't waste this. Remember who helped you. That's how she kept herself in everything. A string tied to every dollar. My mom and I got closer when I moved out. It was like distance from Grandma gave her room to breathe. She'd call me and tell me things she'd never said when I was home. How her mom used to go through her drawers as a teenager and throw away clothes she didn't like. How she'd shredded love letters from Mom's high school boyfriend because he was beneath her. How she'd once slapped my mom across the face for saying she wanted to move to another state. She said I owed her my life, Mom told me, voice small. She said I was all she had. I believed her. I wanted to hate my grandmother. I did, sometimes. But it's hard to fully hate the person who braided your hair on the first day of school and taught you how to make perfect mashed potatoes. That's part of how toxicity works in families. It's never just bad. It's bad wrapped in good, so you question yourself every time you try to name it. The real breaking point didn't come until years later, after I graduated, after I moved back to our hometown because my mom got sick. It wasn't like a movie, no dramatic collapse on the kitchen floor. Just this slow, grinding fatigue that wouldn't go away, then tests, then the word no one wants to say out loud. Cancer. Stage 3. Then 4. My mom fought so hard. Chemo, radiation, surgery. She worked as long as she could until her body just said no. Through all of it, my grandmother was there. At every appointment. Every chemo session. She brought snacks, blankets, magazines. She also brought judgment. If you hadn't worked nights all those years, maybe your body wouldn't have worn down, she'd say. Or, stress causes cancer. You always worried too much. I told you. She said these things while my mom sat, pale and bald, with a needle in her arm. Some days Mom would stare out the window, tears silently spilling, and still not tell her to shut up. I moved back in with Mom and took a job at a local print shop. I drove her to appointments when Grandma couldn't. I learned the language of prescriptions and side effects. I watched the strongest person I knew shrink into someone who needed help getting out of bed. And through all of it, Grandma acted like she was the main character. Nobody appreciates what I do, she'd say, lighting another cigarette on the porch. If it weren't for me, you too would be lost. She'd say that in front of my mother. Eventually, Mom's condition deteriorated beyond what we could manage at home. Hospice got involved. It was brutal. It was also one of the few times I saw my mom set a boundary with her own mother. One afternoon, while I was in the kitchen making soup she wouldn't even eat, I heard raised voices from the bedroom. "You need to sign this," Grandma was saying. "You're running out of time." My mom's voice, weak but firm, replied, "I already signed a will. I told Jonathan what I wanted. We talked about this. Jonathan is a shark," Grandma snapped. "He doesn't care about you. I'm your mother. I know what's best. You need to make sure the house doesn't go to waste. You need to make sure Emily doesn't do something stupid with it. Just sign these guardianship papers and I'll handle the rest." Guardianship. My heart slammed. I ran down the hall. Grandma was standing at the side of the bed, waving a stack of papers and a pen. My mom was propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but resolute. Her hands were shaking. "Stop," I said, stepping between them. "What are you doing?" Grandma shot me a look. "We're taking care of business," she said. "Your mother doesn't have much time, and she needs someone responsible to handle everything." "She chose a lawyer," I said. "And I'm her power of attorney. We already handled this." "You are not equipped," Grandma snapped. "You're emotional. You make impulsive decisions. You moved back for some dead-end job instead of building a career. You're still a child." "I'm 25, I said, voice rising. "And you don't get to decide that signing away control of everything to you is the only responsible option." My mom cleared her throat. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm not signing anything else. I appreciate everything you've done, but I've made my decisions. Emily knows what they are." Something flickered in my grandmother's eyes then. Fury, hurt, something old and ugly. She stared at my mom for a long second, then at me. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice low. "You're both making a mistake." She crumpled the papers in her hand and threw them into the trash can by the bed. Then she grabbed her purse and left without another word. Mom cried after she left. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have stood up to her years ago. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better." I held her hand and tried not to cry too, because I didn't want her to carry that guilt on top of everything else. She died 3 weeks later. The funeral was small. Hospice had prepared us, but nothing really prepares you. Grandma was front and center, in a black dress, crying louder than anyone. She clutched my arm so hard during the service that I had bruises the next day. "We're all we have now," she kept saying. "Just you and me." Part of me believed that. Part of me wanted desperately to believe it. After the funeral, after everyone left, she walked through my mother's house like she owned it. Opening drawers. Commenting on furniture. "You can't afford to keep this place," she said, standing in the living room. "You'll sell it and waste the proceeds on rent. You should let me handle it. I could rent it out, make real money, put it into something that grows. That's how you build a life." "I'm not making decisions right this second," I said, numb. "I just buried my mom." She sighed dramatically. "Grief doesn't pay the bills," she said. "You have to be practical." "I have a job," I snapped. "And I'm not talking about this right now." She looked offended. "Fine," she said. "But don't come crying to me when you've blown your opportunity." The next few months were a blur of admin and grief. Canceling accounts. Sorting belongings. Meeting with a lawyer. Turns out my mom had done more than I realized. She'd filed a will leaving the house and her meager savings to me. There was a small life insurance policy from her old job that I hadn't even known about. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to give me breathing room. Enough to refinance the house so I could afford the mortgage on my salary. Enough to not be in immediate panic mode. When Grandma found out she wasn't in the will, she acted like my mother had spit in her face from beyond the grave. After everything I did, she raged on the phone. After all the money I lent her, she cuts me out and gives everything to a child. "I'm not a child," I said quietly. "And she didn't cut you out. She made specific provisions. She left you some of her jewelry. She asked me to make sure you were comfortable if you ever needed more help." "Jewelry," she scoffed. "Trinkets. I don't want baubles. I wanted security. I deserve security." That was the first time I realized my grandmother had seen my mother's house as part of her retirement plan. The idea made me sick. We didn't talk for a couple of weeks after that. She punished me with silence again, like she had my mom. Some part of me reverted to being 10 years old, desperately checking my phone to see if she'd texted. It's embarrassing to admit, but that's the hold she had. When she finally did call, it was with a new tactic. Sweetness. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was just hurt. I loved your mother so much. I love you so much. Let's not let money come between us." I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted a grandmother who was soft, who wanted peace, who didn't turn everything into a power struggle. So I forgave her, at least on the surface. I went back to Sunday dinners at her apartment. I answered her calls. I listened to her rants about my cousins and her neighbors and the government. But something had shifted. There was this tiny, hard kernel of distrust in my chest now. I watched her closer. I noticed how she talked to the world like it owed her something. How every story of her sacrifices ended with someone being ungrateful. A few months after my mom died, I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned. My boyfriend, Eric, and I had been together for a little over a year. We loved each other, but we hadn't exactly mapped out a timeline. When the two pink lines showed up, my first reaction was panic. My second was aching grief that my mom would never meet her grandchild. Eric was shocked but supportive. "We'll figure it out," he said, holding me while I cried. "We're not teenagers. We have jobs. We have a house. We can do this." I believed him. Mostly. Telling my grandmother was the thing I dreaded most. We invited her over for dinner. She brought a store-bought pie and immediately criticized my front steps for needing painting. I waited until after we ate to say it. My hands were sweating. "Grandma," I said, "there's something we want to tell you." She looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly, sensing a shift. "I'm pregnant," I said. "You're going to be a great grandma." For a split second, her face softened. I saw something like genuine joy flash across. Then it hardened into something else. Calculation. "With him?" she asked, nodding at Eric. He froze. "Yes, with me," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "We're really excited." She leaned back in her chair. "And you're not married," she said. It wasn't a question. "We've talked about it," I said. "We might get married later. Right now we're focusing on making sure the baby is healthy and we're stable." "Stable," she repeated. "You think you're stable? You with your little job and no ring on your finger. You want to raise a child in sin." "Grandma," I said, warning in my voice. "Don't. Your mother would be heartbroken," she said. "She made one mistake and spent her whole life paying for it. You're repeating her choices." That did it. "My mother loved me," I snapped. "And she did just fine raising me without being married." She struggled, Grandma shot back. "Because she didn't listen to me. She thought she knew better." Eric stepped in, voice calm but firm. "We're not here to fight," he said. "We're sharing good news. If you're going to make this about judgment, we can stop the conversation now." My grandmother stared at him like he'd grown horns. "Don't you talk to me like that in my granddaughter's home," she said. "You're lucky I'm even entertaining this circus. You think I don't know your type? I've seen men like you vanish when things get hard." "Eric is not my father," I said sharply. "And you don't get to project your issues onto our relationship." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see," she said. From that moment on, my pregnancy became another battleground. She criticized everything. What I ate, how much weight I gained, whether I planned to breastfeed, where the baby would sleep. "You're not putting that child in your bedroom with that man, are you?" she asked once. "Newborns belong with their mothers. Fathers get jealous of the attention." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. "That's not how our relationship works," I said. "You'll see," she said again, like a threat. She insisted on coming to every appointment. I let her come to one. She peppered the doctor with so many accusatory questions that he pulled me aside afterward and asked, gently, if I wanted her in the room in the future. I said no. She was furious when I told her. "You're shutting me out," she said. "After everything I've done." "It's my medical information," I replied. "I get to decide who hears it." "Ungrateful," she muttered. When my daughter, Lily, was born, she was perfect and tiny and loud and everything I didn't know I needed. Labor was long. I hemorrhaged. For a few hours, things were scary. They got me stable. Eric cried harder than the baby. My first thought when I held Lily was that my mom should be there. My second was that I would do anything to make sure this little person never grew up feeling like love was conditional. Grandma wasn't allowed in the delivery room. Hospital policy plus my choice. She showed up the next morning with a balloon and a bag of clothes, acting like nothing was wrong. When she saw Lily, she actually did cry. Real tears. She has our nose, she said, touching the baby's cheek with a trembling finger. For the first few weeks, it was almost okay. She brought meals. She held the baby so I could shower. She gave me unsolicited advice, but I expected that. Then the criticisms started creeping in. "You're spoiling her," she said when I picked Lily up after she'd been crying. "Let her lungs work. It's good for them." "You're coddling that man," she said when I made Eric coffee after a long night shift and long night with the baby. "He should be doing everything while you recover." "You're too soft," she said, over and over, like it was the worst thing you could be. The real escalation came around the 3-month mark. I decided to go back to work part-time. Eric and I couldn't swing it on his salary alone indefinitely, and honestly, I needed something outside of diapers and feeds. We found a reputable daycare with great reviews. It wasn't cheap, but we could manage. "You're putting my great-granddaughter in a daycare?" Grandma said when I told her. "With strangers." "They're trained professionals," I said. "They have cameras. Background checks. It's a good place." "What am I?" she demanded. "Chopped liver?" "I can watch her." The idea of my grandmother alone with my daughter all day made my stomach twist. "You have your own health issues," I deflected. "And I don't want to put that on you." "It wouldn't be putting anything on me," she said. "It would be an honor. And it would save you money. But of course you think you know better." "Grandma," I said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but we've made our decision." "Your decision is wrong," she snapped. "You're abandoning that baby for a job that pays peanuts. That's selfish." "Providing for my child is selfish?" I asked. "Wanting a career is selfish?" "Wanting to play at being a career woman while your child is raised by strangers is selfish," she said. "Don't come crying to me when something happens to her." I ended the conversation there. Or tried to. I thought that would be the worst of it. I was wrong. A week after Lily started daycare, a caseworker from Child Protective Services knocked on our door. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Eric was at work. I was home with Lily because she had a low-grade fever and daycare policy said she needed to stay home. I opened the door with her on my hip. The woman on the porch held up a badge. "Miss Carter?" she asked. My stomach dropped. "Yes," I said. "I'm with CPS," she said. "We received a call with some concerns about your baby's welfare. Is now a good time to talk?" My brain went static. "What?" I stammered. "There must be some mistake." "Who called?" "I can't disclose that," she said. "But I'd like to come in and ask a few questions if that's okay." I moved aside numbly. She asked about our routine, our jobs, our support system. She glanced around the house at the sink full of dishes, the basket of laundry, the toys scattered on the floor. She checked the fridge. She checked Lily's crib. She examined her body for bruises. I felt like I was being strip-searched with my clothes on. "We got a report," she explained, "that you and your partner are leaving your child with unsafe caregivers, that there's yelling and possible neglect, and that there may be substance abuse in the home." "That's not true," I said, voice shaking. "We don't even drink. We don't smoke. The daycare is licensed and highly rated. We're just tired. We're new parents. Yes, we get overwhelmed. But we're not hurting her." Lily chose that moment to giggle and grab the caseworker's badge. The woman smiled at her. "She looks well cared for," she said. "We take every report seriously, but I don't see any immediate safety concerns. There may be a follow-up visit, but I suspect this will be closed." I nodded, tears burning my eyes. After she left, I held Lily and sobbed. When Eric came home, I told him what happened. He was furious. Who would do that? He demanded. We both knew. There was only one person in our lives who thought daycare was unsafe and who consistently described us as irresponsible. I called my grandmother. She answered on the second ring. Hello. Did you call CPS on me? I asked, skipping any greeting. There was a pause. Someone had to, she said. I felt like the floor dropped away. What? I told you, she said, sounding more annoyed than apologetic. You're making bad choices. That place is not safe. You leave her all day with strangers while you run around like you're single. I hear you on the phone, talking about being tired and overwhelmed. That baby needs someone who can handle her. So you, what? Decided to report us? I asked, voice rising. We're not abusing her. The caseworker saw that. CPS doesn't just show up out of nowhere, she said. They investigate. They watch. It's a wake-up call. Sometimes young mothers need a push to make better decisions. A push? I repeated. You called a government agency to threaten my custody of my child as a push? Don't be dramatic, she said. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. Maybe it will scare that man of yours into stepping up. Eric steps up every day, I snapped. And even if he didn't, even if I was drowning, you don't call CPS because you disagree with daycare. You're not listening, she said, her volume rising to match mine. You are not fit to raise that child on your own. You're too soft. You're too attached. You don't know how to put your foot down. If you insist on doing everything your way, someone has to intervene before that baby suffers. Something inside me went cold. Are you trying to get her taken away from me? I asked. Don't be ridiculous, she said. They would never take her permanently. They might put her somewhere more stable for a while. With family. With me, for example. And then maybe you'd see reason. And that was the moment. The exact moment. I heard it in her tone. In the way she said with me. This wasn't just about concern. This was about control. About punishment. About getting what she thought she deserved, another child to raise the right way. You think they would give you custody? I asked slowly. You smoke a pack a day and can barely walk up a flight of stairs. I raised you, didn't I? She snapped. You turned out fine. I laughed, a choked, bitter sound. Did I? I said. Because I'm 30 years old and still feel like a terrified kid every time you call. You're being ungrateful, she said. I'm being sane, I replied. We're done, Grandma. You don't get to be in my life if you're actively trying to rip my family apart. Do not call me again. You can't keep my great-grandchild from me, she said, panic edging into her voice for the first time. Watch me, I said, and hung up. I blocked her number. I blocked her on social media. I called the CPS caseworker and told her I believed my grandmother had made a malicious report because she disapproved of daycare. The caseworker made a note of it. Unfortunately, we get that a lot, she said. Family disputes. If we don't see evidence of harm, the case will close. Can I do anything? I asked. To stop her from doing this again? She hesitated. If she continues to make reports that are clearly unfounded, it becomes harassment, she said. Document everything. If you feel your child is at risk of being taken by a family member without your consent, you may want to talk to a lawyer about a formal no-contact or cease and desist letter. The phrase taken by a family member made me feel physically ill. I didn't sleep much that night. Every noise outside made me think someone was coming to knock on the door again. Eric held me until my muscles stopped shaking. We're not helpless, he said. She doesn't own us. A week later, my grandmother showed up at my front door. She must have driven herself because her car was crookedly parked half on the curb, half in the driveway. I saw her through the peephole, knocking, then pounding. I didn't open. She shouted through the door. You can't keep me away, she yelled. I have rights. I'll call a lawyer. I'll tell the court you're unfit. My heart hammered. Lily started crying in the living room, startled by the noise. Eric picked her up and went to the back room. Grandma kept pounding. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 10 minutes, my neighbor, an older guy named Tom, came out of his house. I heard him say, "Ma'am, you need to calm down. They clearly don't want visitors." Mind your business, she snapped at him. My granddaughter is keeping my great-grandbaby from me. That's abuse. Yelling in the stairwell while a baby is trying to sleep is abuse, Tom said. I'm calling the non-emergency line. You're disturbing the peace. That finally made her leave. 2 days later, I got a letter. She'd written it in her shaky, looping handwriting. It was 3 pages long, front and back. The first page was pure rage. How ungrateful I was. How all she'd ever done was sacrifice. How she'd saved my mother and me countless times. How I was letting some man and strangers at daycare come between us. The second page was more insidious. It listed everything she'd ever paid for. School clothes, dentist bills, Christmas presents, rent when your mother couldn't afford it, your college deposit, your first car, all followed by, and this is how you repay me. The third page was the one that chilled me. I talked to a lawyer, she wrote. He says grandparents have rights. If you insist on cutting me off, I can petition for visitation. A judge might want to know why you're keeping your own family away. They might want to know about your depression in high school, about your little breakdown after your mother died, about your boyfriend's temper. Eric doesn't have a temper, by the way. He just once raised his voice when she called him a freeloader. They might decide Lily is better off somewhere more stable. Think about that. It was a threat written in blue ink. I did think about it. Hard. I made copies of the letter. I took them to a family lawyer. I showed them to the CPS caseworker at our follow-up. This is textbook coercion, the lawyer said. Document everything. If she files anything, we'll respond. In the meantime, you are within your rights to maintain no contact for your safety and your child's emotional well-being. It's weird how no contact sounds so simple on the internet. In real life, in a small town where everybody knows everybody, it's messy. She called my cousins, my grandparents' old friends, the church ladies. She told them I'd gone crazy and stolen her great-grandchild. I started getting side eyes at the grocery store. My aunt, who lives out of state and only sees grandma on holidays where she's on her best behavior, called me to say, maybe you're being too harsh. She's old. She's lonely. She doesn't mean it. She called CPS on me, I said. She threatened to drag me to court and said my baby would be better off without me. She would never do that, my aunt replied. You're exaggerating. That's the other thing about toxic people. They curate their audience. The version my cousins and aunts see is funny, blunt grandma. The version I lived with was a different creature. Months went by. CPS closed the case. We got a letter confirming there were no findings of abuse or neglect. I framed it as a joke and then stuck it in the drawer with our important papers because some part of me is always preparing to defend myself again. I heard about Grandma through the grapevine. She wasn't doing well. Her health was declining. She fell twice. She refused to quit smoking. She complained constantly that no one visits, even as she told anyone who would listen that I was a traitor. I felt complicated, angry, guilty, relieved. Then, a few weeks ago, my cousin texted me. Grandma's in hospice, she wrote. They don't think she has long. You should come say goodbye. I stared at the message for a long time. I imagined walking into a dim hospice room and seeing her small and fragile in a bed, tubes everywhere, monitors beeping. I imagined her looking at me with those sharp eyes and using her last breaths to guilt me. I imagined bringing Lily and having her try to touch her, claim her, bless her in some final performance. Everything in me recoiled. I wrote back, I'm sorry she's unwell. I'm not coming. My cousin responded with a string of messages about forgiveness, grace, family, God, being the bigger person. Then she wrote the line everyone uses when they want you to override your boundaries for their comfort. You'll regret it when she's gone. Will I? Maybe. Regret is not a stranger to me. I regret not pushing my mom harder to set boundaries with her. I regret ever letting my grandmother hold my daughter before I saw what she was willing to do. I regret the years I spent twisting myself into knots for her approval. But I don't regret protecting my child. I don't regret telling CPS the truth. I don't regret blocking a person who weaponized love to control everyone around her. Yesterday, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was a nurse from the hospice facility. "Hi, this is Julia. I'm one of Margaret's nurses," she said. "She gave us your number as an emergency contact a while ago. I just wanted to let you know her condition is declining. She's been asking to see you and her great-granddaughter. There's no pressure, but I wanted to pass the message along." She paused, then added softly, "She also wanted me to tell you she's sorry, but I know it's not my place to get involved." I sat on the couch after that, Lily playing with blocks at my feet, and felt this old, familiar pressure pushing on my chest. The pull of obligation. The script in my head that says, "She's your grandmother. She's dying. She won't be here much longer. Be kind. Let it go." And another, newer voice, quieter but steadier, saying, "She was also the woman who tried to take your child away because you wouldn't live your life by her rules." Both things are true. Both exist in the same person. My grandmother is not a cartoon villain. She is a human who is damaged and damaging. She grew up in a time and family that taught her control was the only way to be safe. She took that lesson and applied it like a sledgehammer to everyone she loved. She paid bills. She held hands in hospital rooms. She also weaponized that care to keep people dependent. She loved us in her way. She hurt us in very real ways. The question I keep coming back to is this: do I owe her my presence at the end of her life simply because she is at the end of her life? Or do I owe my daughter the experience of a childhood where safety is not negotiable based on someone else's remorse clock? I haven't gone to see her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, I wrote a letter. I don't know if I'll send it. In it, I told her the truth. That I love the version of her that made me grilled cheese sandwiches and let me stay up late to watch old movies. That I hate the version of her that made my mother cry in the kitchen and tried to rewrite my future when I didn't follow her script. That I will tell Lily about her great-grandmother, but I will tell the whole story, not just the parts that make us look like a nice, normal family. That I hope, in whatever time she has left, she finds some peace, not by having everyone rush to her bedside to absolve her, but by facing the parts of herself she spent decades justifying as love. Most of all, I wrote that I forgive her for being who she was, but I do not forgive what she did enough to let her near my child again. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. I don't know if she'll understand. I don't know if she's capable of understanding at this point. Maybe she'll die believing I turned on her. Maybe she'll tell the nurse I was an ungrateful brat until her last breath. Maybe part of her will remember the little girl I was and feel something like regret. I won't know. What I do know is this: the cycle stops here. My mother couldn't fully break it with her own mother. She tried in the ways she could. She wrote a will. She refused to sign those guardianship papers. She left me enough resources to stand on my own feet. She apologized for not protecting me more. She gave me the raw materials. It's my job to use them. My grandmother taught me that love could be withdrawn at any moment if I displeased her. My mother taught me, quietly, that love could stay even when she couldn't. That love could be written down in documents that said, "My daughter decides." That love could be leaving me a house instead of leaving it to the person who wanted to control us both. I used to think being a good granddaughter meant showing up no matter what, swallowing my hurt, letting her rewrite the narrative in exchange for a pat on the head. Now I think being a good granddaughter to the woman my mother was means protecting the life she fought so hard to give me. The house I live in. The daughter I rock to sleep. The boundaries I finally learned to draw. Maybe one day, when Lily is older and asks why she doesn't remember her great-grandma, I'll show her a picture and tell her the truth. That this woman helped raise me. That she also hurt people she loved with her need to control. That we tried, in our own flawed ways, to do better. And then I'll tell her, you never have to let someone treat you badly just because they're family. Not even me. Not even if I'm old. Not even if I'm dying. My toxic grandmother taught me a lot of things. How to cook a perfect pot roast. How to stretch a dollar. How to spot manipulation in other people's words. But the most important thing she taught me, ironically, is what I refuse to be. I won't call CPS on my child because she lives differently than I think she should. I won't demand access to her children as a condition of my love. I won't threaten to take away the people she loves if she doesn't comply. I'll probably make mistakes. Big ones. I'll probably say things that land wrong. But I hope, if I do, she feels safe enough to tell me, and I hope I remember this feeling, sitting on my couch with a voicemail from a hospice nurse and a knot of fear and guilt in my stomach, and choose differently. Right now, my grandmother is in a bed somewhere, lungs rattling, body failing, still, somehow, at the center of a storm she created. Family members are posting old photos of her on Facebook with captions like, "Get well soon, matriarch," and "We love you, Grandma." Some of them are crying real tears. Some of them are crying for the idea of her, the one they knew at holidays when she was charming and generous. Very few of them knew the woman who whispered, "I'll find someone else to raise that baby," when I wouldn't obey. But I did. And because I did, my daughter never will. That's the quiet, messy, unglamorous catharsis. Not some big confrontation at a deathbed. Just a line drawn in the sand, held, even when everyone else thinks you're cruel. I don't know if I'm doing it perfectly. I just know that for the first time in my life, I'm not making decisions based on what will keep my grandmother happy. I'm making them based on what will keep my daughter safe. And that, more than any bedside visit, feels like the goodbye that needed to happen.